Hi, I'm Dean Johnson.
And I'm Robin Hartle.
Well, these days people are always talking about maintenance-free exteriors. Of course, what they're talking about is having windows and siding that don't have to be restained and painted every few years.
In most cases, that means vinyl for the windows, vinyl for the siding, and either aluminum or vinyl for the soffits and fascia. So that's what we're going to be tackling in this program on this house.
Now, the work that we're going to show you, we think most do-it-yourselfers could handle. And by doing the work yourself on a house this size, you should be able to save between $3,000 and $4,000 in labor costs.
But as you'll be able to see and can probably tell by this dumpster, it's a lot of hard work to earn that savings. And we're talking about 10 or 12 long, hard days for two people.
In this videotape, we'll take you through all the steps for installing new vinyl siding on a home, as well as instructions on how to cover the soffits and fascia.
We'll also show you how to install another type of siding that's starting to become popular. It's called cement fiber siding.
Home time is made possible by Chevy full-size pickup, the most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickup on the road. The National PBS Series Home Time is made possible by the Stanley Works. Since 1843, Stanley has been committed to building quality tools and other products to help you do things right. At Home Time, we believe the best way to get the job done is to use the finest tools.
And this Chevy full-size pickup is one of our favorites. Equipped with an optional Vortec 5700 V8 engine, it generates 255 horsepower and 330 foot-pounds of torque to power you through the toughest jobs.
And with the optional third door, you've got lots of room for all your other tools.
And friends to help you use them.
At home or on the job site.
For work or play,
it's no wonder we at Home Time count on Chevy full-size pickups.
The most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickups on the road.
Now, we picked this house for demonstration because we thought it was probably pretty typical of what a do-it-yourselfer might tackle. Now, along the way, we'll show a few alternatives that might work better for the job you're looking at.
Well, so far we've taken off all the old siding. Nothing too complicated about that. But one important tip is you either want to pull out or pound in any nails that are sticking up. You want a nice, flat, even surface for the new siding. To make it a little bit more even, we're adding this quarter-inch foam fan fold insulation.
The foam comes folded up in bundles that are 4 feet tall and 50 feet long, so each one covers 200 square feet. You secure it with galvanized roofing nails, and we only need a couple of nails into each stud. When we come back and nail on the siding, those nails will really secure it in place.
We've run the bottom of the foam down to where it just covers the top of the concrete foundation. And we're not going crazy trying to get the foam perfectly level.
This wall is only about 7 feet tall, but we don't measure and cut the foam before we put it up. Instead, we let the two rows overlap along the middle and at the end. Then we come back and cut through both pieces at the same time. We take out the scrap from each layer and we end up with a very tight seam.
But once the surface is all prepped, then we can start putting on the trim pieces. Now, the way the siding works is the top of the first piece connects to the next piece above it. Now, the only problem is there's nothing to connect the bottom of the siding to, so that's why we install the starter strip. We nail that up to the wall, and then we're able to connect the bottom to that first piece like so.
Now, in an ideal world, the house would be perfectly level. The soffits would be level. The windows and doors would be level and plumb, so therefore the siding would go on level. But sadly enough, we do not live in a perfect level world. So we had to make some adjustments. Here's what we did.
Generally, we think that the soffit is the most visible horizontal line on the house. So we measured down from the bottom of the soffit framing on both ends of the wall. We picked a dimension that would reach down over the top of the foundation at both ends. We measured up 2 1/4 inches on both sides, which is the width of our starter strip, and we snapped a chalk line on the insulation.
We nailed the starter strip in place so the top of the starter strip was on the line. We nail loosely in the middle of the slot. And we put in a lot of nails, about every 12 inches. And if you need more than one length of starter strip, leave about a ½ inch gap between pieces. Okay, we've got the starter strip on. Now this may not be perfectly level, but what's important is that it's parallel to the soffit as opposed to being level.
Now, if you've got a wide window with a long horizontal sill, that may be a more important horizontal line for the siding to be parallel to, so it can change from house to house.
Now one other thought, it's really nice if you can get all the siding to line up all the way around the home. Now that doesn't always happen, and you do have natural break points like our chimney up here where you can make some adjustments, and so if the siding doesn't perfectly line up there, you really don't notice it.
Okay, it's time for some more trim pieces. The corner pieces and window and door trim. The end of each piece of siding always needs to be hidden. That's the purpose of the various trim pieces. The most common piece of trim is called a J-channel. This usually goes around windows and doors.
For outside corners, there's a piece called an outside corner post. The outside corner post has a channel formed in each side. The ends of the siding will fit into these channels.
If your corner is taller than a single piece of corner post, cut about 1 inch off the nailing flanges and channel on the top of the lower piece. Slip the upper piece down over the remaining flanges on the lower piece. For inside corners, the easiest way to go is to use an inside corner piece. It also has 2 channels built into it for the ends of the siding. You can also handle inside corners by installing 2 pieces of J-channel. By putting 2 pieces into an inside corner, you create 2 slots for the ends of the siding on each wall. There's one other common way to treat inside corner pieces, and that's by putting in a piece of vinyl or metal flashing and then using 1 piece of J-channel. The J-channel holds the siding on one wall, and the siding on the other wall fits into the gap between the J-channel and the flashing. However, to create this piece of flashing, you need to use a large tool called a brake. This is probably more than most do-it-yourselfers want to get into. When you use J-channel around the top of a window or door, you need to do some complicated cutting and mitering to make sure that water flows around the window properly. Here's what's involved.
We start with the trim under the window. We use an accessory called undersill trim. We cut it to length, and then at each end of the piece, we remove about 1 inch of the nailing flange from the back. We've cut it so it'll stick out about 1 inch past the window on the sides. This way, it'll match up to the bottom end of the side J-channels. To get the right length for the side J-channels, we measure the height of the window, add a little more than 1 inch, and cut the piece roughly to length. Then we set it in place again and make sure we've got the bottom of the piece just where we want it. This is so we can mark exactly where it crosses the top of the window. We measure up from the mark 1 inch, which is the width of the face of a piece of J-channel. Then we cut the front of the piece to this mark. Next, we cut away 1 inch along the top and cut away 1 inch of the nailing flange. This leaves just the face of the channel. When I nail the piece in place, all that should be sticking above the window is a short piece of face. I do the same process for the other side piece, and then I measure for the top piece. I measure from the outside of the faces of the side channels. After I cut the piece to length, I cut it 1 inch along both sides of the bottom of the channel. I cut the nailing flange off the back, and I bend down the short piece on the bottom of the channel. And finally, I cut a 45-degree miter across the face. I make the same type of cut at the other end, and then I set the piece in place. Now it's a little awkward fitting the piece over the side channels. The tab needs to fit down inside the side channel so that any moisture in the top channel will flow around and down the sides of the window. Once both ends are tucked into place, I can nail the piece in.
There are some variations in the way you trim out windows. Here are a couple of different looks. For one, at the bottom, you can run the sill trim to the edge of the window and bring the J-channel down flush with the bottom of the face of the trim. If you like, you can even put J-channel along the bottom of the window. If you do this, you'll still want to put a piece of sill trim inside the J-channel. As you'll see, sill trim is necessary to grab the cut edge of the siding under the window.
Different siding manufacturers offer different accessories and trim pieces. One trim piece we like is a wider version of the J-channel. This creates a look of a wide piece of wood trim around windows and doors. However you install your window trim, somewhere along the line you'll want to caulk the joint between the J-channel and the window itself to keep moisture from getting behind the siding. One way is to back caulk. This means putting the caulk on the side of the J-channel before you install it, so it's sealed to the side of the window. Another way is to face caulk. This means putting the caulk on after the vinyl trim has been installed, and you can concentrate on sealing up the gap between the two pieces on the surface.
Now, we're ready with all the trim, except for the top of the wall. We're going to leave that alone for now. On the top, you need to go back and forth between working on the soffit and working on the siding at the same time, so we'll get into that later. But we're now ready to install the first piece of siding. We're going to start with a full piece. With siding, there's a little curl on the bottom that needs to hook into a slot on the bottom, get that flipped around, on the bottom of the starter piece. Get this over. Okay. Now our starter piece is only about an inch above ground level, so it's a little difficult. You got to kind of feel around in there.
Okay, I've got it in down here.
Okay, I've got my end in.
Okay, I'll lock in the rest of this.
Let me know when you got it.
Okay, there we go.
All right, you want to slide it in this way.
Sure.
And you want to slide the ends of the siding into the channel for the outside corner post. Is it stuck?
Yeah.
No, there we go. But you don't want to jam it in. It's best to leave, okay, you got to back it up just, okay, right there. You want to leave about a 1/4 inch between the siding and the inside of the channel, because the siding is going to slide around as it expands and contracts due to changes in temperature.
Now that expanding and contracting is also the reason why you want to put the nail in the middle of the slot at the top of the siding. You also want to hit the studs, which can be a little bit of a challenge in itself. And you want to put the nail in just a little loose. Some people will tell you 1/16 of an inch between the siding and the nail, but really the proof in the pudding is if you can just slide the siding back and forth a little bit once it is nailed. Now if you can slide the siding back and forth, then that means it can move on its own, so you don't have to worry about any buckling. Now in terms of this nailing loosely, that applies to all the vinyl, not just the siding. So for instance, this starter strip down here, that was nailed loosely, and so are all the other trim pieces. Okay, Robin, go about 56 1/4.
Okay.
All right. Now the only exception to that is the vertical pieces. And there you put the first nail at the top of the slot so it doesn't slide down. Then the rest of the nails go in the middle and again loosely.
Well, this is the second piece for the first course. Obviously, it needs to be cut to length. For the time being, we're just using these general purpose snips. Here you go.
Okay.
And we want the cut end to slide into the J-channel around the door so the two factory ends can meet. Once you get that. Well, that's important because we want the two pieces to overlap in the middle by about an inch. The nailing flanges set back from the factory edge so that we can do this. And again, the reason we want them to overlap is so that the siding can slide around without exposing the sheathing underneath.
Now for the second row, we'll start by using our scrap piece. We'll take the cut edge and we'll slide that into our corner post to hide it, and then our factory edge will overlap down there. Now the way this works is we just slide it underneath our last row and it kind of snaps into place. We adjust it here perfectly and then we just hold it up and nail through the slots. Okay, I'll go ahead.
As we move up a wall with each row of siding, there's a couple of things we need to think about. The easiest thing for do-it-yourselfers to mess up is not firmly pulling up each piece as you install it. Once a piece is locked into the piece below it, pull the nailing flange up in the center of the piece. Then put the first nail in. As you nail, work from the center out towards each end, pulling firmly and nailing as you go. If you pull up each piece the same way, you'll get a consistent horizontal spacing between each row.
Another tough thing is making sure you nail into the studs. Professional siding contractors have a knack for knowing where to nail. But we think it's perfectly acceptable, and it's even advisable, for do-it-yourselfers to take the time to mark the studs. If you find there isn't a nailing slot where the stud is, you can use a special tool that punches out a slot anywhere you need it. And where the end piece runs into a window or a door, there should be enough framing to get the nail into the last slot on the piece. Cutting around obstacles is a big part of a siding project. For under a window, hold the piece in place and mark the cut for width, making it about 1/4 inch wider than the window itself.
Then, take a scrap piece of siding, lock it into the last full row of siding, and mark it for the horizontal cut, leaving 1/4 inch extra clearance below the window.
Draw on the vertical cuts with a square and use the scrap to mark the depth of the cut. Use aviation snips to make the 2 vertical cuts. Use a utility knife to score the long horizontal cut. Once it's been scored, you only have to bend it back and forth a couple of times and it breaks pretty easily. To give the sill trim something to hold on to, use a special tool called a snap lock punch to bend out little tabs along the cut edge. Make sure the tabs are poking out away from the house.
Sometimes the horizontal cut in the siding along the bottom of the window will fall at the bottom of the pattern. If this happens, the cut edge might not meet up with the sill trim. You might need to take off the sill trim and put a thin piece of wood or foam behind it to hold it out farther from the house. When you install the cut piece under the window, the tabs will lock into the sill trim.
Putting siding around other obstacles besides windows requires some ingenuity and the right accessories. For big items like electrical boxes, you can trim them out with J-channel and sill trim.
J-channel is used to side around other obstacles, including siding up to stone or brick. When you've got the J-channel butting up to an irregular surface, like brick, it's crucial to caulk the gap thoroughly. For individual pipes or cables that pass through the exterior, you're probably better off just cutting a hole in the siding that's just slightly larger than the obstacle, and then using caulk to seal it up.
To trim out the exhaust for a clothes dryer or a bathroom vent, most lines of siding come with a vent cover that is channel built into all 4 sides. There's also a special accessory that allows you to side around switches or outlets. It's called a fixture mount. The face of it comes off, which allows you to attach the back part to the wall. Then the face snaps back in place to form a channel around the piece. For hose spigots, you can use what's generally called a split mount. This is like an electrical fixture mount, but the back splits apart so you can slip it behind the spigot.
Okay, well, it took us about an hour to get up to the second to the last row, and there's a couple of other things that you need to take into consideration here. First, like we said before, you want to stagger the overlap between the pieces from row to row. Ideally, you'd want them about 3 feet apart, and you want to avoid having joints either above or below the windows.
Now the other thing about butt joints is one side is going to look better than the other. For instance, on this one right here, this piece overlaps this one. So this side is going to look better. As you look at it from this direction, it just about disappears. Whereas when you look at it from this direction, you're looking right up the butt joint. Now we consider this the most important view. When you're sitting up on the patio, you want to see these disappear. So as you go around the entire home, whenever you're doing a different wall, you have to decide which way is your most important view.
And we're not going to install the last row of siding yet. First, we're going to work on the soffit and fascia. And then we'll slide the last row in below the soffit. Now to get started on this, I want to install a piece of J-channel onto the underside of the soffit framing. The J-channel will hold the ends and edges of the soffit panels. The nail slots in our J-channel didn't land over the 2x4 soffit framing, so we've punched extra slots every 2 feet or so, and we use these to attach the channel. Where 2 pieces meet, we cut away everything but a small tab in the face on one piece. This fits behind the face of the second piece for a tight joint. We use J-channel along the house and at either end, but not along the outside edge of the soffit.
We cut the soffit panels about 1/4 inch shorter than the overall dimension and slip them into place. Each panel locks into the previous panel, just like siding. We use 1¼ inch aluminum trim nails to nail the outside ends of the soffit panels into the bottom of the 1x6 wood fascia. We like to use 2 nails on each piece, nailing through the 2 middle grooves in the panel. And we don't have to drive the nails all the way down into the groove. This is a 2-foot wide soffit, so we added a 2x4 running down the middle for extra support. And we nail the soffit into this with galvanized roofing nails. If the soffit were less than 18 inches wide, we wouldn't need that center support.
We have 2 types of soffit, solid and vented. Every 3rd piece we use the vented soffit so that air can pass up through the soffit and cool the underside of the roof and the attic spaces.
When we get to the end, we have to cut the last piece to fit whatever space is left. This makes this end a little less attractive than the end where we started. So it pays to think about which end is the most visible and start installing the soffit there. If you really want to drive the nails flush, there's a small setting tool that will fit up into the groove and allow you to pound the nails down all the way.
The outside ends of the soffit pieces are covered with this matching aluminum fascia. We nail up through the lip on the bottom, through a groove in the soffit and into the 1x6 wood fascia. We overlap the pieces and remove a little of the back lip on one piece so that they lie flat on top of each other. Sometimes you'll have to make small, complicated cuts and bends on the fascia. You'll probably need a hand brake. It's a tool that grabs the aluminum between 2 flat plates. For example, where the fascia turns a corner, we've cut and bent a piece to wrap around and cover the end of the board.
What you do at the top edge of the fascia depends on what's there at the edge of your roof. What we're doing is to slip a piece of matching aluminum drip edge under the shingles. This has a flange along the bottom that covers up the top edge of the fascia material. We attach this by nailing through the drip edge, through the aluminum fascia, and into the wood fascia.
Generally, we try to avoid nailing through the front of the fascia, but we have no choice in this case. Another option is to place a piece of sill trim at the top of the wood fascia. The top edge of the aluminum fascia can slide up into the sill trim. This might be the way to go if you're installing gutters or some other type of flashing at the edge of the roof. Once the soffit is done, then we can turn our attention back to the siding. We use a piece of sill trim under the J-channel that holds the soffit. When we install the sill trim, we push up tight to the J-channel that holds the soffit. This J-channel sometimes flops around a little, and the sill trim can help hold it tight to the framing.
Once the sill trim is in place, we measure for the height of the last row of siding. We measure from the top of the sill trim to the bottom of the locking lip on the previous piece and then subtract 1/4 inch. We cut the top row of siding to this dimension. We use a snap lock punch to put tabs along the cut edge. Then we install the piece, locking the tabs into the sill trim under the soffit. Okay, now we've shown you the basic techniques for installing siding, soffit, and fascia. But remember, this has been a fairly straightforward wall.
Now let's show you some variations on those techniques and some situations that you'll probably run into.
Where the house steps up or down, you'll probably have to cut off some of the bottom of the row of siding. Use a piece of sill trim to grab the cut edge. Just like underneath windows, you may need some furring behind the sill trim to hold it out the right distance from the sheathing.
As you're working your way up a wall, you should check every now and then to make sure you haven't gotten out of alignment. Either check up from the bottom row or check down from any significant horizontal line that you're working up towards. By pulling the siding up a little tighter or a little looser, you should be able to make up for any small variations.
If you're siding up to the gable end, you'll have to use slightly different procedures. First of all, you can't use a sill trim at the top of the wall. You have to install J-channel to hold the diagonal cut edges of the siding. To cut the siding at the right angle to fit into the J-channel, lock one scrap piece into the last row of full siding. Use another scrap piece of siding to transfer the angle of the gable onto the first piece. Cut the template along the line and then use the template to mark the ends of the actual pieces of siding. You should double check your template every couple of rows in case the pitch of the roof varies. And you should make a new template for the other side of the gable. The angles might not be exactly the same. The very top triangular piece of siding can be nailed through the surface at the peak. This is the only time you can ever face nail siding. Use a matching colored aluminum trim nail. If your siding comes down on top of a roof, you'll need to install J-channel at the bottom of the wall to hold the cut edges of the siding. Install the J-channel at least 3/4 of an inch above the roof surface. One trick is to use a loose piece of channel to hold it up while you nail it. You need the space between the roof and the siding so that the heat from the roof doesn't cause the siding to expand excessively. Sometimes you'll end up using J-channel on all 4 edges of a soffit. This happened to us on this overhang. When you have J-channel on both sides, you need to bend the soffit and the channel a little to fit it in.
So far we've shown you how to use snips or a utility knife to cut siding. You might also want to use an electric circular saw. To do this, we built a simple cutting table. First, we cut up some 2x4s and screw them down on top of the chipboard. This will be a fence. We'll hold the top edge of the siding against it. We screw some 1x4s down to hold the siding up off the surface. And then we start to build a little platform for our saw. One set of 1x4s holds the saw above the siding. The second set of 1x4s will guide the saw.
To cut vinyl with a circular saw, you use a fine-toothed plywood blade, and you should mount it backwards. This gives you a cleaner cut. To use this rig, you mark the length you want, slide the piece into the table, and run the saw through it.
Well, that's a lot to absorb, so we do encourage you to rewind and review this section of the tape.
Well, things that might have seemed a little confusing at first probably seem clear now that you see how the whole project fits together.
Well, now we're going to show you the basics of another popular type of siding, cement fiber siding.
This material, fiber cement siding, is becoming very popular. It's made out of a combination of Portland cement, sand, cellulose fiber, and water. In terms of how you use it, it's basically like wood. It takes paint very well, and it's also real durable.
We're using a few areas on this house to demonstrate how to install it. We're just getting started around back with this fiber cement lap siding. Just like with vinyl siding, getting started takes a little bit of extra effort. The bottom of the siding should be at least 6 inches above the soil so that insects and moisture don't come into direct contact with the material. We've figured out the width of our bottom piece, measured up from where we want the bottom edge of it to be, and we're drawing a reference line for the top of that piece.
We're starting our installation with a skirt board that runs around the base of the house. It's simply a decorative touch. We could just as easily start the lap siding at the same point. The fiber cement siding is available as a trim material as well, and that's what we're using for the skirt board. It's about a ½ inch thick. To make it appear thicker, we're installing it over a ½ inch oriented strand board. To protect the skirt board, we're installing a piece of flashing over it.
And just like with vinyl siding, we have to put on the trim pieces before we can start siding. For the outside corners, we're again starting with pieces of OSB for thickness. We install fiber cement trim pieces on top of both sides. The pieces come 3½ inches wide. We use the same technique to install one trim piece on the inside corners. We ripped this piece to 1 3/4 inches wide.
We're also running a band of trim around the doorways and windows. Now this isn't required, it's more than anything, it's just a design choice. And we put a strip of OSB behind it to give it some depth. To get the most secure installation, it's important to nail the siding to the studs, not just the sheathing. So before we begin, we mark the stud locations on the house wrap. To keep each course straight and even, we mark where the top of each row will go. The material is 8 1/4 inches high with a 7-inch exposure. So the first line goes 8 1/4 inches up. After that, we snap lines every 7 inches. Just like with vinyl siding, we need to install a starter strip for the bottom of the first course. For fiber cement siding, all it has to be is a strip of a 1/4 inch thick wood lath, which will push the bottom of the first row of siding out to the proper angle.
The first row of siding sets in place on the flashing. We nail 1 inch down from the top edge into the studs. We use 2-inch galvanized siding nails, and the material is pretty dense and hard, so each nail is a little bit of work.
Just like with vinyl siding, we need to nail very carefully. With fiber cement siding, you need to nail so that the head of the nail is snug and square to the surface of the siding.
If you countersink the nail into the siding, it won't hold as well. If you accidentally do this, drive a second nail next to it and cover the countersunk nail head with caulk.
When we install the next course of siding, the bottom edge of the piece covers up the nails at the top of our first piece. We line the top up with our layout line and again nail it into the studs.
Where the siding butts into the corner and trim pieces, leave about an 1/8 inch gap. You need to fill this in later with caulk. Where two pieces meet, you can have up to a 1/16 of an inch gap. You don't have to caulk this joint, but we do. And we caulk it before we install the next row so that we can get caulk into the very top of the joint. If we wait until later, the top of the joint will be covered by the bottom of the next row. There's a couple of ways to cut this material. We like using a special electric shears made just for this material. You can also use a circular saw with a carbide-tipped blade. This works well, but the downside is that it's pretty noisy and it kicks out a lot of dust. If you have to cut around a hole for an outlet or a spigot, you can drill a pilot hole and then use a jigsaw to finish the cut. Although you can do it several ways, we left our outlet box loose so we could pull it through the hole in the siding and then mount it flush with the face of the siding.
For our window, we trimmed it out on all 3 sides with trim material over strips of OSB. But along the bottom, we left off the trim and used a thinner piece of OSB. Once we've installed the siding under the OSB, we install the bottom trim piece. This way, the trim piece hangs down over the top edge of the siding and covers the nails.
We use a similar technique around light fixtures. We mount the light on a rectangular piece of trim that hangs down over the top of the piece of siding underneath. Having nails showing isn't a big problem, so it's also possible to bring siding right up to a window on all 4 sides without any trim. You only end up with a couple of exposed nails underneath the window.
Another option that's available for installing siding is to use a pneumatic nailer. You either have to set the pressure a little lower so that the nails don't get countersunk, or you need to get a special flush mount attachment for the end of the nailer that makes sure that the nail is driven flush.
We caulked our butt joints as we went, but everything else can wait until we're finished with the job and are getting ready for painting. To get the most durable, long-lasting finish, it's important to use a high-quality paintable latex caulk.
The fiber cement material is also made in pieces that resemble cedar shingles, and that's what we used above the dormer over there. Well, we're going to use the same material over the garage, and we're going to start with one of these sunburst effect right above the door.
With shingles, you need to be able to nail anywhere, unlike lap siding where you had to nail right on the stud. So you need to have at least 7/16 inch plywood or OSB sheathing underneath. Okay.
Now, even though we are doing these above the garage, we're still going to use the same techniques as though we were starting above a first floor wall. There you go.
The sunburst is attached to the sheathing with a special adhesive. It's made of molded urethane and it comes in 2 pieces.
The adhesive will hold it in place, but you'll also need a few nails to hold it in place until the glue sets up permanently.
You need to install 2 different pieces of starter to push the bottom of the first row out to the proper angle. First, you need a thin strip of 1/4 inch lath. This is the same thing we used for the first course of the lap siding.
Then we put in one 9.5 inch piece of lap siding. Since the shingles will have small gaps between them, you want to make sure that when you look between the shingles, you see solid material. You can also use a strip of 1/4 inch plywood. This is only a problem on the first row of shingles. From here on up, the lower row of shingles will provide this backing.
The shingles come in 3 widths, 6, 8, and 12 inches. For the first row, you can install them in a random mix. You secure each shingle with 2 nails. And the same nailing rules apply as with the lap siding. Use 1.5 inch galvanized nails and nail snug, not countersunk. We're going with a 7-inch exposure, so we nail 8 inches up from the bottom of the shingle. This way the nails will be hidden an inch above the bottom of the next row. The shingles have slightly irregular sides. This makes them look more natural. So you want to leave a slight gap between them, up to 1/4 inch.
Once you're done with the first row, we measure up 7 inches and snap a chalk line across the face for the second row. To install the shingles for the second row, we line the bottom of each one up with a chalk line, put in 2 nails 8 inches up. We have to be careful as we install these. We don't want a joint on this row to line up over a joint in the first row. Water might seep through the gaps and get onto the sheathing underneath. So we have to experiment and pick the right size shingle. You want the joints to be at least 1.5 inches apart, row to row.
The power shears can be used to cut almost any odd shape, like the curves we need for around the sunburst. If you don't have shears, you can use a jigsaw.
At the end of each row, we cut the pieces at an angle. And we've already installed our soffit and OSB backing. We butt the cut shingle into the OSB. Once we get the shingles on, we can finish the soffit and fascia along the roof edge. We had to start this before we installed the siding.
The first thing we did was to install the soffit material. This is a special 1/4 inch thick board that you can cut to the right width and nail up into the 2x4 rafters and framing.
If you want to include vents in your soffit, you'll need to install the soffit in 2 sections. One piece, then the vent, then the second piece. There's a special type of continuous soffit vent that is designed for use with fiber cement soffit material. Once a soffit was installed, we put in OSB backers on the wall below the soffit. We used 2 layers, and this creates a surface that's thicker than the shingles. Then we did our shingling. Once we finished installing the shingles, we installed the first trim board. This is a 7.5 inch wide piece that hangs out over the shingles and covers the nails and cut edges. Then we install a second trim piece on top of the first that's 3.5 inches wide. When you're going through 2 layers of this material, it's a good idea to have pre-drilled holes for your nails. Next, we install the first fascia piece. This is a 7.5 inch wide piece that hangs down and covers the edge of the soffit piece. And finally, we install a thinner 3.5 inch piece right up under the edge of the roofing. Since fiber cement's available as trim, lap siding, shingles, soffit and fascia, you can really use it on just about the whole house.
And once you paint it up with a high-quality latex paint, you'll have an incredibly durable exterior.
Well, that's it for this videotape. Now, Home Time has tapes and books on all sorts of projects.
Check out your home center, hardware store, or check us out on the web at hometime.com. I'm Robin Hartle.
And I'm Dean Johnson. Thanks for watching.